Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our World of Darkness, where today we're going to continue our look at Oblivion. At least we're going to take a look at the necromantic side of Oblivion for the Hecata, because as I discussed in the last video, Oblivion's been split into two different disciplines. They took, or I guess you could actually say they took two disciplines and merged them. They took Obtenebration, and they took necromancy and mashed them together. If you want to get technical, they also took Thanatosis and Mortis and like whatever else you want, Nihilistics, and put them all into one thing, which is not necessarily the best choice in the world, but it's something that I find novel and entertaining, so I can't say that I dislike it. There are a few aspects of Mortis that has always bothered me in the old editions, primarily in Obtenebration. When they used Obtenebration, it was very vague on where the hell it was coming from. If it was a whole nother dimension of shadow beasts or whatever. But you do see the evolution of necromancy as time goes by. If you've read through a lot of Vampire the Masquerade older editions, you can see how, timeline-wise, necromancy came from Mortis. Mortis being the discipline that the Cappadocians originally used, but it being more of a physical response like most other disciplines, where necromancy seemed to be more of a using a scientific bend or a ritualistic mindset on the discipline Mortis. When they brought in the Giovanni, we ended up getting Negromancy, or black magic, and Negromancy was the baby steps towards what we know in modern night play as necromancy. But you also get things like Thanatosis, which seemed to be like Mortis on crack, and the Nihilistics discipline, which was a completely wholly different discipline, which seemed like necromancy because it had necromantic qualities, but in reality it was more of a discipline that developed from living in the Shadowlands for a long time. The most obvious take on that in V5 would be Passion Feast, where you get to feed on wraiths and stuff, but there were lots of other things like Eyes of the Wraith, being able to put your consciousness through the eyes of a spirit in the area and stuff. So as you can see, things have gone through. So in last video, where we talked about the actual discipline applications of Oblivion, we are going to go talking about the ceremonies now, and the more in-depth practices that take time and aren't just a reflex action. So, what the book says about Oblivion ceremonies. Unless otherwise noted, performing a ceremony requires a rouse check, 5 minutes per level to cast, and a winning resolve plus Oblivion test, difficulty equaling the ceremony level plus 1. So a ceremony level 1 is going to be a difficulty of 2, 2 is going to be a 3, and so on and so forth. Ceremonies usually require additional ingredients or sacrifices to mingle the caster's vitae with. Unless otherwise stated, the caster can only perform beneficial ceremonies on themselves. Ghouls of necromancers, or thin bloods, drinking from empty temperaments, gain temporary access to Oblivion powers, but not the ceremonies. Ceremonies each have a prerequisite Oblivion power. This requirement acts as a gateway for necromancers that blood sorcerers need not pass through. At character creation, a player can choose one level 1 ceremony if they have at least one Oblivion power noted as the prerequisite of that ceremony. Characters can buy new ceremonies at the cost of the ceremony level times 3 experience points, providing they meet the power prerequisites as well. Learning new ceremonies during play requires both experience and time, as well as a teacher who knows the ceremony already. Expect a ceremony to take at least the square of its rating in weeks to learn. Note, past and future products contain Oblivion ceremonies and powers that may match well with those presented here. If these books are available, the storyteller may feel free to suggest alternate prerequisite powers. So that's pretty darn cool. I like the fact that it basically says that to learn certain ceremonies, you have to be able to do certain things with your basic necromantic powers of Oblivion. And that makes a lot of sense, considering the fact that each practitioner is going to learn something a little bit differently. Applying those lessons that they've learned to a more intellectual bend is going to be more independent towards that individual character and not just the practice of Oblivion itself. And I do really, really appreciate that. So what exactly does that mean when it says the time, though, and that you can expect a ceremony to take at least the square of its rating in weeks to learn? Okay, so that's actually not that difficult. Basically, what that means is that you need to multiply the number of the level of the ceremony by itself, and that will get you the answer. So if you're trying to learn a level 1, it's going to take about a week to learn it. If you want to learn a 2 times 2 is 4, and 3 times 3 is 9, continuing on and on and on. But so it's not that difficult, but it does give you a time period of how long it's going to take. If you are learning things on out of character basis, such as currently in the Chronicle that I'm doing right now, I have a player who's learning Oblivion stuff. I would basically just make it a little bit harder, depending on the teacher's proficiency. So what I plan on doing is maybe adding a week on to make it a little bit harder. So if currently the player character, or if currently the character who is named Dawn Rose is trying to learn an Oblivion ceremony 1, it's going to take her 2 weeks. If it takes, and it's because I'm just going to add a week on there just because of the proficiency of the teacher. She is a master necromancer teaching her things, so she's going to be able to grasp on a little bit better. Given that, I might actually, an alternate version of how to figure that out is I might actually just have her throw a test of her intelligence plus occult, and depending on the level, I'll just have, actually, you know what? I'm working through storyteller stuff in my head, and you guys get to come along with the journey. What I'm going to do is have her throw a test of intelligence plus occult. With that, because she does not have Oblivion. Actually, I'm still going through things. Okay, so looking at the difficulty of actions chart, I'm going to go ahead and say that the learning of another discipline is probably going to be very hard. I'm going to go ahead and say it's very hard, so it's going to be a difficulty of 6. What I'm going to do is have her throw a test. And this is homebrew stuff, so I don't know why I'm telling you guys this, but it's fun that I'm working this through my head right now with you guys. What I'm going to do is have the difficulty set to 6, and then she's going to take her intelligence plus Oblivion levels and throw a test. The margin of that, I'm going to have her remove the difficulty down just a little bit. So she's going to have to get quite a few successes on that to help trim down how many weeks it's going to take to learn her Oblivion ceremonies. So that is going to take the fact that she has been granted 4 years of tutelage under the Hecata to learn these ceremonies and discipline gifts. It's going to help me to space out that time a little bit. So that being said, let's hop right into the ceremonies and find out exactly what they mean for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition and the practice of Oblivion. And the first one is level 1, the gift of false life. Through use of this ceremony, a vampire can raise a corpse or group of corpses to perform simple, single, or repetitive tasks. Prerequisite power, ashes to ashes. Ingredients, a human body or multiple bodies. A small concoction of blood, phlegm, and bile. Delicious. Process. After applying the concoction to the corpse or corpses and performing the ceremony, the affected bodies animate into a form of false life. They follow a single command from the vampire, providing it's simple and the corpse is physically capable of performing it, such as sweep the floor, hold this door shut, or walk around the house perimeter. They have no ability to think or calculate, so conditional or complicated commands such as attack the next person to walk through the archway, or drive this car, or build a shack does not work. They may be directed towards specific targets for attack or other actions if the necromancer points at them. System. The player makes their ceremony roll, and upon a win, they raise a number of corpses equal to their Oblivion rating, or the number of bodies they have prepared, whichever is lower. A critical win doubles Oblivion rating for the purpose of determining the corpses raised. The mindless corpse's animation ends when it is destroyed or it concludes its task. These corpses do not defend themselves if attacked and decay as normal. The ceremony does not grant them any form of immunity to the elements or time. And then we have a chart of exactly what this character sheet would look like for this brain dead NPC. So we got our standard dice pool and our specialties and stuff like that, and I'll be happy to share that right here. This reminds me very much of the old necromancy ritual, Apprentice Brooms, where you basically create a crappy one-use zombie that's great for cleaning and doing menial tasks. So it looks like to me that this hasn't really changed much. I do not remember if this was actually a discipline or a ritual in the older ones, because a lot of the ceremonies and rituals were actually just like, this could be like level 1 of the bone path or something like that in the older system. Next level, Summon Spirit. Summon Spirit used to be like level 2 or 3 of the Sepulture path, or the Sepulture path. So it is kind of interesting to see it marked down as a ceremony. I always felt that it worked better as a ceremony, and it kind of fits the old human necromancy power that was in the old Blue Hunter book for Seance. But let's go ahead and take a look at that. Summon Spirits. This ceremony enables a vampire to summon a spirit from the underworld. Prerequisite powers: the Binding Fetter. Ingredients: one of the targeted wraith's fetters, a photo or other visual depiction of the wraith, or their signed name. The caster's vitae also. Process: the necromancer pours their vitae over the wraith's fetter, and studying the picture or signature, calls out the wraith's name. The wraith feels their fetter's call and begins a journey from their location in the underworld to that of the caster. Though geography has different scales in the underworld, a journey may still take several nights if the spirit is on the other side of the world. If the shroud is thin enough in the summoning location, the wraith is pulled through the veil between the worlds by the fetter's strength. The summoned wraith is under no obligation to serve the vampire upon being called, and may act with hostility if they feel the vampire is threatening their fetter, which may be an object, a building, or even a person. Alternatively, the wraith may be grateful for the summoning and the possibility for companionship. Wraiths summoned in this way do not manifest physically, but as shadows on the wall, quavering silhouettes of their living selves, from which voices might emerge. Wraiths speak the same language they did in life, unless they've gone through the trouble of learning new ones in the underworld. System. The caster daubs the fetter with their vitae and makes an Oblivion ceremony roll. The Wraith cannot pass through the shroud if it's impenetrable in the ceremony's location, and moving the fetter after the ceremony doesn't help, as the Wraith's ability to pass through the shroud disappears if the fetter leaves the ceremony's site. The Wraith disappears at the end of the scene unless a separate ceremony is used to compel or bind them. There's a little bit of a note here. Calling the dead. If all it takes to get a Wraith's attention is to interfere with their fetter, why learn a ceremony to call it? Wraiths cannot pass through the shroud without the ceremony pulling them through, and without one of their own powers allowing the same. In some rare cases, Wraiths are grateful for the summoning, as it enables them to escape the aggressors on their side of the shroud. Just as in vampiric society, vampires do not always make the best of friends just because they've shared a communal experience of death. So Summon Spirit is like a multi-leveled ritual when it comes onto this one, because it doesn't just have to do with messing with the fetter to get somebody to come to you, because Wraiths can feel their fetters being messed with. But this allows them to, if the shroud is thin enough, to cross over, to communicate, and that can be quite useful if you're looking for information. You can actually see how the different bloodlines of the Hecata would use this in specific ways, because the Giovanni are known for interrogating and near torture of Wraiths, where the Zemeti are known for befriending more often because they have a higher respect for the dead. So you can, with a little bit of study on exactly what the style of the bloodline's interactions with the dead would be, you could actually come up with some pretty cool interactive things here, which could lead to very fun plot lines that would be built off of just using these ceremonies. In fact, most ceremonies here could open up a numerous amount of plot lines that would just give your story more life to go with. Funny enough. Alright, level 2. Awakening the Homuncular Servant. The first thing that pops into my mind when I see Homuncular Servant is I go into the old thaumaturgy stuff, because Homunculus is a thaumaturgical servant that they had in the older editions. Necromancers use this ceremony to create spies and stalkers out of body parts such as hands or skulls, or small dead animals like rats and foxes. That's actually kind of funny, because this is almost the exact same thing. This is almost a stolen ritual from the Tremere. Prerequisite power. Wear the shroud thins. Ingredients. The required body part, or animal carcass. The weapon used to sever or kill it. A small concoction of urine, fecal matter, and semen. So we're going into some, to quote Dean Winchester, witches are just unsanitary. Fun. Process. The caster coats a blade or other device suitable for the task in a gross cocktail of bodily fluids and uses it to cut the targeted appendage off its root, limb, or body, or kill the small animal, which cannot be larger than a small dog and cannot fly, regardless of whether or not it has wings. After massaging vitae into the target, it comes to life as a homuncular servant, unfailingly loyal to its master. The homunculus can scale walls, hop, even if it lacks the limbs to do so, and hide effectively. While it cannot speak or perform tasks requiring deep thought, it can telepathically communicate single images to its creator. System. The Necromancer's player makes an Oblivion ceremony roll and after doing so, gains a homuncular servant that will spy, follow, or intimidate at the necromancer's command. If it strays farther than 100 yards or meters from the vampire, it falls inert, only awakening again once the vampire enters that range. Otherwise, it remains active for a number of nights equal to the number of successes rolled. A critical win on the roll keeps the servant active forever, while a total failure destroys all components involved in the ceremony. Again, homuncular servant here. So this is identical to the old thaumaturgy ritual of creating a homuncular spirit, or gift of the homunculi, or depending on whatever edition you're reading it from. But this, it always did seem a little bit more necromancy than thaumaturgy to me, and I don't know. It just seems like this is something like I can't get over the idea of like this old Cappadocian wandering around with a dead cat, just following it around. This is my baby. It does what I tell it to do. You can see how this is going to be a fun component to anything, and the idea of having maybe a necromancer who's trying to get the attention of somebody and uses this as a way to lead it from lead the target from one place to another is just so much. There's a silliness factor when it comes to adding magic to vampire, and it might not always be there. And yes, this is a disturbing ritual, and it should be, depending on how you acquire the ingredients to make this thing. I can see this also becoming something that would cause your character to get stains, but I don't know, there's a sympathy to this as well, and I know that sounds kind of like out of the blue, but imagine the vampire who is, I want a companion in some fashion, but I want a companion at my terms. It actually is, it fits very much into the whole headspace of like Jeffrey Dahmer, who everybody remembers Jeffrey Dahmer as just this serial killer cannibal and stuff, but in reality what he was trying to do was he was trying to get a companion on his terms. He did not think that it was a good thing. He was very disturbed by his mentality also, but one of the things that he was trying to do was he was dropping acid, not the drug, but acid. He was dropping acid into the brains of his victims, so that trying to zombify them, trying to make it so that he had them living but not at the same time, to follow simple instructions and to have basically just a mindless companion. And I can kind of see that there too, because I've seen people who, hell, I talk to my pets, and I've seen people who talk to houseplants, and I can see somebody who creates one of these things just to keep it around for the company. And I don't know, over time I can see that actually becoming an interesting plot point also. But the idea that there's this necromancer who just wanders around and just talks to their homuncular servant, and they're the only one that they can ever really relate to, is a very interesting thought to me. So let's move right along into the other level 2 ceremony, Compel Spirits. This ceremony allows a vampire to bend a wraith to their will. Prerequisite: wear the shroud thins. Ingredients: a wraith's fetter, the caster's vitae, an item or threat sufficient to damage a fetter. Process: the vampire must be in close proximity to a wraith in order to use this power, typically through use of summoned spirit. The necromancer casts a handful of their own vitae in the wraith's direction as they hold a destructive item to the fetter. A knife, a hammer, a gun, or potentially holding the fetter over fire, or speaking threatening words that the wraith believes. The vampire and wraith engage in a contest of wills. If the vampire gains domination over the wraith must serve as the vampire decrees, at least temporarily. If the opposite occurs, the vampire is left mentally debilitated and the fetter disappears from their grasp. System: the vampire player makes an Oblivion ceremony roll versus the wraith's resolve plus composure or willpower, if the traits aren't defined. If they have no way of physically threatening the fetter, the player must make a manipulation plus intimidation roll difficulty equal to the wraith's resolve plus composure. If the player rolls more successes than the wraith's resistance roll on their Oblivion ceremony roll, the vampire can command the wraith to perform a number of moderately difficult tasks: spying, research, answering questions truthfully, etc., equal to the number of successes rolled. For every 2 successes, the vampire can instead command the wraith to perform difficult tasks, such as attacking someone, doing something repugnant to the wraith's sensibilities, etc. On a critical win, the vampire can demand any action from the wraith, and it will try its best to complete the task. The wraith remains in the vampire's service until the end of the chronicle, or until it has fulfilled the master's command, at which point it returns to the underworld with an eternal enmity for the necromancer. If the wraith wins the contest, the vampire suffers the margin of superficial health damage. The wraith then re-enters the underworld. The compulsion placed on the wraith ends immediately if the vampire attacks them. If the vampire harms the threatened fetter, the wraith suffers between 1 and 3 aggravated willpower damage depending on the importance of the fetter, and the wraith is sent back to the underworld to be tormented by and possibly converted into a murderous specter. So this is the power that was used on the wraith at the beginning of the story in the last video, where Ambrogino Giovanni was using it to threaten the wraith, I believe of his sire. That's what it seemed like, because the wraith did call him his child. This is 100% possible because the Giovanni are known for not letting their family members be out of the family business after death. Most ceremonies can be chronicle changing, but this one is definitely in that, due to the fact that you gain a retainer. You can gain a wraith retainer from this, and if you do it right and you do it smart, you're going to have a chronicle long servant where if you do not play this safe, you're going to gain an enemy, which you need to be very, very careful about, especially since unless you're watching your back at all times, you have no idea if they're going to be there or not. Haunted is not a flaw that you want to take lightly, especially if the wraith itself can gain political powers on the other side to use against you on this side. Level 3, Host Spirit. This ceremony allows a vampire to open their body to possession by a ghost. The benefits of having a wraith ride one's body comes in the form of enhanced physique, access to whatever memories the wraith choose to share, and the wraith's voice, offering the vampire advice. The wraith can take complete possession of the vampire if they wish to, which some necromancers view as blessing to be experienced, and others deem to be the main reason not to use this power. Allowing a wraith to control one's actions for the night is an effective way of confusing and mollifying the beast, as well as demonstrating physical powers and knowledge the vampire may not usually possess. Prerequisites: Aura of Decay. Ingredients: a gift to be made as tribute to the wraith. Whether the wraith's value depends on the individual. A parasitic bug. 2 teeth extracted from the vampire's mouth. Ooh, that's interesting. When the ceremony requires some pliers. Process. The vampire must be in close proximity to a wraith in order to use this power, typically through the use of summoned spirit. The necromancer presents a tribute to the wraith, sometimes in the form of alcohol poured on the wraith's gravesite, or a bag of coins to be buried in the earth, or even a freshly decapitated head of one of the wraith's until recently living enemies. The vampire then pulls 2 teeth from their mouth, usually with pliers, and bites into a parasite with the remaining teeth. The vampire then opens their mouth, and the wraith can choose to jump inside, inhabiting the vampire's body. System. The vampire player makes a successful Oblivion ceremony roll. If the wraith agrees to the proposition, it then enters the vampire's body and can remain for a number of scenes equal to the successes rolled on the Oblivion ceremony roll. With the wraith inside them, the vampire gains +2 dice to all physical attribute rolls and +2 health until the wraith departs. The vampire can hear the wraith in their head, with its advice, cajoling, or supporting words provided by the storyteller. A wraith can choose to assert its possession instead of acting as a passenger. If the vampire resists, they make a resolve plus composure roll versus the wraith's resolve plus composure. If successful, the wraith's influence is rejected. If failed, the wraith steers the vampire until the end of the scene, though it can't make the vampire do anything self-destructive. On a critical win, the wraith is ejected entirely and returns to the underworld. On a total failure, the wraith can make the vampire harm himself, but returns to the underworld after the first injury is sustained. A vampire whose body succumbs or is voluntarily opened to the possession attempts finds all willpower damage healed once the wraith departs, as the spirit subdues the beast for as long as it is present. This is such a fun new thing. There is nothing like this I remember from any of the old systems, and it has a lot of Zemeti influence. You can tell this because the Zemeti are obviously influenced heavily on the Vidawan traditions and taking the Loa in and letting them be ridden. I've seen some beautiful ceremonies in real life for this kind of thing, and I can see why they brought it into this, and I really hope that it's not considered insulting to anybody, because this is something that I don't want to see leave. I don't want to see this leave Vampire the Masquerade, because it does give a cultural backbone to the Zemeti. And the fact that the Zemeti are now considered the spiritual leaders of the Hecata, because they don't force wraiths to do something. And if you look at the different types of necromancers, it makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to Cappadocians. The Cappadocians had Mortis, which was this is how our discipline works. We have rot and decay. We study death, but we don't actually have a spiritual aspect to this. Then you get the Giovanni who comes involved, and the Giovanni were all about spirits and ghosts, but they were all about tormenting them and forcing them to do things. They were using them as an asset and a resource. The Harbingers of Skulls hid from the Giovanni due to the Purge and found a way to live off of wraiths, and very similar to the Nagaraja and their necromantic practices. The Nagaraja were almost like the Giovanni, but on a more kind of a more sinister outlook on things, because theirs was controlling and devouring of wraiths. You look at the minor families, and it is all about the minor families of the Giovanni, and it's all about powers in one fashion or another. But then you get to the Zemeti, and the Zemeti learned how to respect, love, and honor the dead. How to understand that those who passed might have more knowledge than we do because they've already experienced. And if you give them proper respect and you open yourself up to them, you might very well be able to learn something from it. And that's what this ceremony is all about. And yes, there are definitely ways to fuck over a player with this as a storyteller. Definitely. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. In fact, I highly encourage it. But you need to not make that the norm. If that was the norm, there's no reason why that anybody would ever want this. There should be that chance that a wraith is just going to go, oh, I've got your ass for the scene. You can't do anything about it. Let's climb up to that building and jump off. That is definitely a thing that could possibly happen. But the idea of a wraith working in concert with a vampire, at least working stealthily destructive towards the vampire. This is something that can go into a whole new understanding and opening of the Hecata. Because if the Zemeti are in fact the spiritual outlet, then the Hecata themselves are evolving past the need to just muscle in on things, and that is a good thing. Moving on, we have a shambling horde. Now, shambling hordes were part of the bone path before. Shambling hordes were in fact a level of the necromancy bone path, and it never really made sense to me because it was just like, I'm gonna say some stuff and all of a sudden zombies. But there was preparation for it then too. So the fact that it is more of a a ceremony here and not just a reflex action discipline, because that's really what I see the difference between ceremonies and disciplines are. Is a discipline is a reflex action. Even if you are causing it to do something, it is a I do this, it happens thing, where a ceremony on the other hand is I need to prepare, I need to gather things. And imagine if all disciplines have ceremonies. Can you imagine celerity ceremonies? Could you imagine potent ceremonies? Those kind of things. I could see things like chemistry having a ceremony. But let's dig into shambling hordes, shall we? The ceremony enables the necromancer to raise a group of aggressive walking dead minions. Prerequisite: Aura of Decay. Ingredients: a human corpse or multiple human corpses. A fresh human sacrifice. You will be gaining stains from this. Process: the vampire must have a separate corpse in addition to the human prepared for sacrifice. The vampire murders the sacrificial victim, spilling their blood on the corpse or corpses intended for animation. If the ceremony is successful, the corpses stand. The recent sacrifice does not. Revived with the fresh blood and serves the vampire's command even moderately complex orders such as kill everyone who enters. Groan if you see anyone pass this way, or terrorize that neighborhood. Unlike the corpses raised using gifts of the false life, these animated dead do not sit idle if left without commands, instead attacking anyone around them except for their masters. System: the player makes their ceremony roll, possibly incurring stains. In the process, depending on the chronicle tenets and the storyteller's discretion. Due to the amount of blood spilt in this ceremony, the caster must test to resist a hunger frenzy. Difficulty of 2. Upon a win, a number of aggressive dead equal to the number of Necromancer's Oblivion rating, or the number of prepared bodies, whichever is lower, receives the gift of animation. A critical win doubles their Oblivion rating. For the purpose of determining corpses raised. Corpses animated this way do not decay and only enter repose if commanded to by the vampire, if the vampire meets final death, or if they are destroyed. As per the normal rules for temporary advantages like these, their continued usefulness beyond the current story must be ensured with experience, such as through the retainer's background, or the aggressive corpse may become unstable and unruly. Aggressive corpse. So, I like the idea of being able to raise like true zombies at this point because they're just aggressive, but they'll listen to you. This really does call a hold of like the idea of The Walking Dead and things like that. It does say that they die if if the necromancer dies, but I'm pretty sure that I would probably house rule that they don't, just because it'd be a lot of fun to have unruly corpses on the way now. Now imagine having like a prime antagonist in a chronicle be a necromancer who uses shambling hordes against the masses. That is interesting, but let's take it to the next level. You finally kill the necromancer, and then you find out how many of these corpses the guy actually had in storage waiting to be used, and then you've just got hordes wandering through the city. Like that right there could be a fun little story thing. An all flesh must be eaten meets Vampire the Masquerade kind of style game. And I'll admit that I'm kind of actually, I love the whole zombie apocalypse genre, but I'm also terrified to use zombies in a vampire game because that there's a point where you just can't go back. Zombies, you're destroying the masquerade at that point. It's really difficult to go back from zombies attacking in mass. But it is always something that I've wanted to do. Hence the story that I uploaded before, not too long ago, the vegan zombies, which was just a one-shot fun thing play test for running Vampire the Masquerade on computer. So yeah, you should actually think about this one before you use it, but also have fun with it, because this can definitely cause some problems, which would be a lot of fun. Level 4, Bind the Spirit. Vampires with access to this ceremony have the ability to bind wraiths to specific locations and people. Prerequisite power, Necrotic Plague. I don't understand that, but whatever. Ingredients: a wraith's fetter, the caster's vitae, the sacrifice of an innocent human, sufficient salt to surround the property or individual. If the target for haunting is an individual, the necromancer must possess something of their body, such as fingernails, hair, blood, or skin. Process: the vampire must already have the wraith under their control using Compel Spirit. The vampire kills an innocent human, though innocence is subjective. This tends to apply to the young, caregivers, and genuinely pious individuals in or close to the location or person they want their wraith to haunt. Subsequently, they mix their vitae with sufficient salt to surround their target for haunting and paint a circle with the mixture. The wraith's fetter is placed somewhere within the location of the target's possession. From this point on, the wraith is forever bound to the target unless the vampire cancels the ceremony, the fetter ever moves from the location or individual's possession, or the wraith is destroyed. Binding also ends if the necromancer attacks the wraith. Most wraiths bound in this way are furious or melancholic about their plight, and their mood affects the area around them. Many necromancers use this method to defend their havens or haunt their enemies. System: following the steps of the ceremony, the vampire may incur stains from the murder depending on the chronicle tenets and the storyteller's discretion. They make their Oblivion ceremony roll that cannot be resisted, as the Wraith must already be compelled for this power to work. The Wraith is bound in perpetuity to the location or individual targeted, with no duration applied to the ceremony's effects. Any emotion the Wraith feels intensely during its binding affects the inhabitants of the location or the individual to whom it's bound, with each person affected suffering a 2 dice penalty to all rolls made to resist acting or feeling the way the Wraith feels. Therefore, an angry Wraith may make vampires more inclined to frenzy, while a depressed Wraith may make a mortal more likely to stop self-care. Bound Wraiths have the same powers as specters, which can be found in the Vampire the Masquerade core book. So this power basically infects some location or a person with haunting, which is pretty damn cool, because that right there is like one of the core things that you think about when you think about necromancers. Yes, the idea of zombies and everything is cool, but sending a Wraith to do something is also an interesting thought. The idea that you could also reverse engineer this ritual to turn it into a plot line of a haunted house or something of the like, where you have to remove the fetter, is an interesting idea. Actually, you know what? This is a pretty cool thing. There was a episode of Supernatural not too long ago. The show's been over for a while. Some time ago, there was an episode of the show Supernatural where there was a Wraith causing havoc in this girl's life, and they were trying to figure out what the fetter might be, because they actually did follow pretty much the same rules when it came to this, when it was a Wraith being bound to a certain thing. And it turned out the item that they were bound to was a kidney. That somebody was going to die because they needed a kidney transplant, and I believe it was their sister who gave them the kidney transplant and then shortly after died, but were bound to their sibling due to that whole event. And were, because the Wraith was getting more and more aggressive over time, it was starting to cause problems because it couldn't be let go. And there was no way to save this person. In the end, the person ended up dying. And that was the only way to stop the Wraith. And it was like, did we win? Kind of thought at the end of the episode. And I think that's really what makes that's what comes to mind when I think about this power. Also the idea of just like stuff being hidden inside walls and things like that. A haunting in Connecticut kind of thing is an interesting way of looking into this. I highly suggest watching some movies that have to deal with hauntings and possession and stuff like that when you're working on Oblivion concepts in your head. Moving on to Split the Shroud, which is also a level 4. This ceremony allows a vampire to create a tear in the shroud through which wraiths can pass, and vampires with the correct ceremonies can physically enter the Shadowlands. Prerequisite powers: Necrotic Plague. Ingredients: a scalpel that's been used to cut into someone living, chalk or charcoal, a silk sheet, a human sacrifice. Process: the vampire hangs a silk sheet over a wall in a place where the shroud density is standard, thin, or frayed. They then murder a human sacrifice against the sheet, usually via some manner of bloodletting, and as the blood coats the sheet, cut it open with a scalpel. The ceremony widens the portal between the world of the living, which wraiths call the Skinlands, and the Shadowlands. Wraiths who enter the Skinlands via the method take to haunting locations and people, indulging in their passions, and possess humans if their powers allow for it. Some treat the vampire with gratitude for splitting the shroud, while others enjoy harassing the necromancer responsible. System: the caster kills the human sacrifice, which may result in stains, depending on the chronicle tenets and the storyteller's discretion. When cutting the silk sheet with the scalpel, their player makes the ceremony roll with -1 difficulty if the scalpel was used in the human sacrifice. Due to the amount of blood spilled in the ceremony, the caster must roll to resist falling into a hunger frenzy, difficulty of 2. For every success on the ceremony roll, the shroud's density reduces by a level, down to being absent. Following this ceremony, vampires can access the Shadowlands with Ex Nihilo more easily, but importantly, if the shroud rating is reduced to absent, wraiths can spill into the Skinlands as they see fit for the remainder of the chapter. Once the chapter concludes, a shroud density of absent increases to frayed, and the gateway for the wraith closes. So that's pretty damn cool. I really wonder what most storytellers would mark down as a chapter. I try to do a chapter per night, so I would assume that means the night. But the idea of going, I'm killing the sacrifice here on this sheet, and then having to physically rend the shroud itself by cutting through a silk sheet, it's depicted nicely, and it is something that I'm glad they've added to this. It seems a lot more, the ingredients are a lot more important, and it adds a bit of it adds a little bit of more of a macabre mysticism to it that I like. I enjoy how graphic this stuff is, because again, you're not playing a nice, happy, person when it comes to this. The idea of the way John Constantine in the DC universe is portrayed as this emotionally detached individual who's just constantly battling his own demons is about as good as you can get when you're dealing with something like this. Because if you desperately need to open the shroud, there is going to be a price to pay, and unfortunately it's probably going to be an innocent human life. Level 5, Ex Nihilo. Ex Nihilo has carried over from older editions, so let's see what they've done differently here. This ceremony enables a vampire and their coterie to migrate into the Shadowlands, though doing so comes at a great risk. Prerequisite: Withering Spirits. Ingredients: mask for each participant, a bowl containing sufficient quantities of the caster's vitae, so each participant might coat the soles of their feet in it. 2 coins of any value per participant. Process: few ceremonies of Oblivion come with much doubt and fear as Ex Nihilo. The ability to migrate into the Shadowlands. This ceremony enables a physical crossing into the lands of entropy. Vampires who physically enter the Shadowlands may interact with the wraiths as if they were solid, but cannot carry objects beyond those on their person with them. Vampires destroyed in the Shadowlands disappear into a vortex of blood and ash, sucked into the false earth beneath their feet. Ex Nihilo appears to a great many necromancers and mystics who want to study the Shadowlands without the implements of a time limit. It's an unmatched method for interviewing ghosts and exploring the necropoli the city's spirits inhabit. It's also incredibly dangerous, as many wraiths, especially specters, seek to destroy vampires, draining them of their willpower, and there's always a risk of meeting the ghost of someone the vampire slew years earlier. Such wraiths tend to hold a grudge. The vampire must have used the Split the Shroud ceremony within this chapter in the location they're currently occupying in order for Ex Nihilo to function. If the shroud density is reduced to absent, the caster and any companions may enter the Shadowlands from that point. If they don't mask to cover their faces, dip or paint their feet in the vampire's vitae, and carry a coin in each hand. That's a very interesting wording. I might be reading it wrong, but it seems like there should be a or, if and or kind of thing. Like if you're using split the shroud, then you don't have to paint the feet and hold coins in each hand. But I'm not getting that also as I'm reading this. If anybody else has a better interpretation of the way this one should be read, please let me know. I'm very interested in that. System. The user makes 3 rouse checks sufficient to expend the required vitae, and expends a willpower point to prepare for the crossing. They then make their ceremony roll. If successful, the vampire, a number of companions equal to the number of successes rolled, and any object on their person may then enter the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands follows several rules that do not exist in the world of the living. Wraiths are capable of physical attacks on vampires, but some are also capable of attacking vampires' willpower, specifically as they drain the vampire's passions. Defense pools against willpower drains, which a wraith can attempt up to 3 yards or meters from the vampires, are made up from the vampire's resolve plus composure versus the attacking wraith's strength plus brawl. This attack inflicts aggravated willpower damage. Though there is no sun, and therefore no daytime in the Shadowlands, the vampire must still rouse the blood every 24 hours. With no sunlight, they are able to operate without rest. Vampires in the Shadowlands cannot interact with the world of the living in a meaningful way. They can only touch or speak the living creatures by ending the ceremony, which takes the expenditure of a willpower point and another rouse check in the place where the shroud isn't impenetrable. They can see snatches of motion through the shroud, and the disciplines such as Auspex may enable them to spy from beyond the veil, but, for the most part, anything viewed has a difficulty of 4 or more to perceive. Vampires can use their disciplines in the Shadowlands, just as they can use them in the lands of the living. If a vampire is compelled to feed in the Shadowlands, they cannot obtain sustenance from wraiths without the Passion Feast power, but can feed from mortals and other vampires with them. Oblivion absorbs individuals who lose all their health or willpower in the Shadowlands. They leave no wraith if destroyed. Vampires cannot bring wraiths out of the Shadowlands without the ceremonies such as Summon Spirit, which must be used in the lands of the living to have any effect. Duration. Until the power is deactivated or the vampire is destroyed. So, Ex Nihilo really hasn't changed much. I am a little bit confused on the wording that they use for the process, because it does seem like they're implicating an either or, such as like you can use this without these things if you use split the shroud first. But I could just be reading into it a little wrong, or it could just be a translation error or printing error. Who the hell knows? There's always going to be something, so maybe I found it. When it comes to mistakes in books, they happen. But all in all, this ritual does seem to be a lot of fun. I think this is a good callback for the Feast of Folly, where the Cappadocians were all locked underground by Cappadocius himself, and the Capuchin came and freed them, teaching them a way to cross into the Shadowlands. If that is the case, how they fed until they were able to get a hold of something like Passion Feast is a little strange, unless they were just known to come back out of the Shadowlands from time to time, which is definitely a possibility. Maybe they came back every couple days just for feeding. Now we're going to end off with the other level 5 ceremony, Lazarine Blessing. This ceremony enables a necromancer to bring a freshly dead body back to life, though not how its relatives and friends might remember it. Prerequisite: Scald Fulfilled. Ingredients: 1 human sacrifice, incense, the heart of any mammal, powdered silver. Process. The necromancer burns incense to perfume the air before performing an act of human sacrifice, cutting the heart of the victim out and replacing it with the heart of another mammal, though it doesn't need to be stitched in and working for the ceremony to function. After pouring a bag of powdered silver over the open eyes of the dying or dead mortal, the vampire invites a wraith to take the deceased mortal as a host. Wraiths cannot be forced to possess a body, but few wraiths refuse the opportunity to walk around in semi-living shoes again. System. Killing a mortal for this ceremony may incur stains depending on the chronicle tenets. If the replacement heart was likewise taken from someone the vampire murdered, the murder might also incur stains. Following a successful ceremony roll, a wraith can enter the freshly dead body and live in it as if it were its own. The wraith must be present during the act of sacrifice. The possessed corpse will wake bearing the wounds that killed it, though the replacement heart is functional, no matter its origin or placement. And the body heals 1 point of health damage upon possession. The remaining health damage recovers with time. The body possesses the same physical attributes, disciplines, ifagool, and backgrounds it had in life. Social and mental attribute skills, and any form of morality rating match those of the wraith. This possession lasts indefinitely, or until the possessed body dies again or the wraith is exorcised from its host. The body gains no special resistance to harm beyond disciplines it might have possessed in life. The ritual Lazarine's Blessing reminds me very, very much of the ritual used at the end of the first chapter of Sticks and Stones, Body of Lies, which is located in Cults of the Blood Gods. It's not identical, but I don't think it also gave the same effects either, because when you bring somebody into that, it literally is just giving them a new body to wear. They are still human for all intents and purposes. They can be ghouled, which shows that they can have disciplines and things like that. But the one that's performed in Body of Lies is more of a, I'm taking this powerful spirit and putting it in and letting it hold on to things. It's more like creating a risen, really. But again, this is just another fun ritual that can be used with many different aspects of storytelling involved, either creating an entire story off of this one ritual or just having it take place in the storyline, because having an NPC with knowledge of the Shadowlands is a nice thing to have too. But again, the interactions between the Anarchs and the Hecata, or the Camarilla and the Hecata, aren't going to be the same thing, so it's going to work more well in a Hecata-based setting. But again, with how the Hecata are, they are more of a sect than they are a clan, so we will see exactly how that goes forth. So that was our look at Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition Ceremonies for Hecata Oblivion. From what I understand, also, we will be getting more ceremonies and possibly even more just Oblivion powers inside the Trials of Ash and Blood supplement that's going to be coming out, which acts as a sequel to Cults of the Blood Gods, which I want to get a hold of. I'm excited to see it. I want to use it. So I'm sure we're going to end up having more to go over at some point. Thank you for joining me on this special look into these fun powers that we're getting deeper into, and I will see you next time as we cover Oblivion from a La Sombra's perspective. Good evening.